All right, so we did a lot of prep. In the last section, we installed Axios into our project. We're now going to use it to make a request over on Pixabay and then console log out a list of images that we want to show the user. So I'm going to flip back over to my Pixabay documentation. And I see all the documentation here on how we search for photos. We're going to make a GET type network request to this URL. Now, in order to make a search for a list of photos matching with this Q parameter, I'm going to change this static yellow flowers data to the search entry. As a reminder, please check that the API key is this one. If they're both the same, then you don't have to do anything. If it's not this one, just take this one and then put it inside of this URL. Okay, so I think Pixabay is doing that instead of us. All right, so let's copy this URL and flip back to our code editor. Now, in order to make a request with Axios, inside of the onSearchSubmit method, we will call axios.get, and then this get function is going to take our URL and paste it inside of here. All right, so now we have our access key right here. And we saw that key just a moment ago when we were looking at documentation. And remember, it's required to be able to fetch data from the Pixabay API. And then there's one last thing we have to do. And hopefully you'll notice that when we make a request to this URL, we have to include a Q parameter. And I think it's an abbreviation of query. So this Q parameter is going to contain the search query that we want to use instead of yellow flowers like it was before. So in our case, we want to add in a parameter of Q, and we want to set its value equal to the entry that was passed into the onSearchSubmit function as an argument. And because we don't always want to be fetching data for yellow flowers, we do want it to be fetch data of whatever the user types in the input. So in order to ensure that's what happens, I'm going to remove these quotes, and I'm going to use ES 2015 backticks. And instead of these pretty yellow flowers, I'll just put in our search entry. I will say $. Right after that, put a set of curly braces, and inside of it, I'll put the entry parameter like so. Now, if you're seeing these backticks for the first time, in our case, it will actually help us to add dynamic data into this string. It's going to add the search entry into the line, into this particular line of the request. Or in other words, this Q parameter will be equal to my entry. Make sense? So if we're searching for cars, that's going to be car. All right. So this right here is going to make a request over to the Pixabay API, and it'll make a search for a certain number of photos on Pixabay, and it's going to send back some photos that are found. So let's just go ahead and save the file and test it in the browser real quick. All right, so now I'm going to open my network tab over here, and I'll just clear the request log. So I'm just going to type in some search terms here like flowers, enter, and see the requests appear. Now I can select it and then go to the preview tab right here, and I should be able to see some results for the data that was fetched. So let's open up results, and it's going to show me the first 20 images that were fetched from the Pixabay API matching the search term flowers. All right, so we've got our request to get the data. Now we're going to start to think about how we're going to get the data out of the requests and eventually render a list of images onto the screen of the user. But we're going to have a quick little discussion about how we're going to do this first. All right, so that's what's going to be happening in a time sequence of events, right? So in chronological order, we first start with rendering our application. The app component is going to render itself one time without any images. Remember, when we first load our application, we will have no images. So it's only when a user enters a search term and then hits enter, then the onSearch submit method gets called, and we make an actual request over to Pixabay API. When we make that request over to Pixabay, it's going to take some amount of time to get a response from that API. So we're essentially going to be waiting for a response. And then when we finally get a response, then we want to use that image data to update what our app component is showing. And in order to get our app component to re-render, we're going to have to call the setState function. And then setting our images as state on the app component will cause the app component to re-render, and then we can use that as an opportunity to show the list of images. So remember, when we first start that app, we had said earlier that we would make a new component called ImageList, and that would be responsible for showing the list of images. But right now, let's just print out the number of images that were fetched because I don't want this particular video to be so long. So I'm going to find my onSearch submit function, and I'm going to mark it with the async keyword like so. Putting the async keyword in front of the function name, that'll allow us to use the async await syntax inside this function. And now in front of the network request that we make, we'll be using Axios right there. I'm going to put an await keyword. And then in front of that, I'm going to assign a new variable called response. So now I have const response equals await Axios, and then that entire request. Okay, so I can console log out the response in order to show the result. All right, so before I tell you anything more about this syntax right here, let's save the file and then run it so that we can see the result. I'll just put in a search term of cats and hit enter, and I see the result of that object right here. So this object contains all of the images that we're searching for, right? So when I click on it and open the data, we can see the array that contains 20 different images, which is cats, right? So let's console log out to see it more clearly. We'll say response.data.hit. Now let's look at the results again. I'll type cats and hit enter. All right, here we go. We can see the array of cats again. Good. So now let's talk about this async await keyword. So when we want to use the async syntax, we just put that async keyword in front of the method name. And then we're going to find whatever is returning or whatever is taking some time to resolve. In our case, it's the network request with axios.get. And we put the await keyword in front of that. And then whatever gets returned from this entire statement right here, we will assign it to some variable, in our case, this response variable. And then we can freely work with that variable later on. All right, so now we're able to get our list of images in here. So we're going to take a break, and we will continue in the next section.